The heroic story of Henry Cavill, who arrived in a quiet town to visit his father, unfolds as he fights to save his native land from bandits. Determination to defend his family legacy burns in his eyes as he confronts organized criminal elements. Dangerous bandits invade the farm, leaving a trail of destruction and chaos in their wake. Henry unites the local community, awakening a belief in strength and unity among its people. Strategic clashes and clever ambushes turn the peaceful village into an arena for decisive battles. Every street and every field becomes a battleground for the future of their homeland. Heroism, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of the people forge an epic struggle for justice. Every victory and defeat leads to unexpected twists that alter the course of history. Sinister enemy plans are unveiled, and the fight escalates into a genuine military conflict. A new era begins as the town's residents come together to protect their land from modern threats. Henry Cavill arrived in the small, windswept town of Westwood, a place so far removed from the glitter of Hollywood that even the simplest details spoke of another era. The late afternoon light painted the dusty roads in hues of amber and gold as he drove along the crooked country lanes. His arrival was not heralded by fanfare or flashing cameras but by the quiet hum of rural life and the nostalgic echo of a simpler past. The town, bordered by rolling fields and ancient oak groves, was home to his father's modest farmstead, a patch of land that had nurtured generations of family traditions and weathered countless storms. It was on this very land that Henry's childhood memories intermingled with the echoes of his past, a past he had long tried to escape. The farmhouse, built of weathered stone and timber that had absorbed decades of history, loomed at the edge of a sprawling field. Henry's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and unease. Here, under the wide-open sky, the burdens of his cinematic life seemed both distant and deeply intertwined with the quiet persistence of rural existence. His father, a taciturn man whose eyes held the secrets of the soil, had rarely spoken of the hardships of farming, yet those unspoken stories resonated in the very air of Westwood. Upon his arrival, the tranquility of the scene was shattered by subtle signs that not everything was as idyllic as it appeared. In the fading light, Henry noticed a trail of broken fences and disturbed earth leading from the outskirts of the property toward the neighboring abandoned barn. A sense of foreboding crept over him as he recalled whispered warnings from local residents about strange occurrences and recent acts of vandalism that had plagued the region. The serene landscapes now hid the threat of marauding bandits, a group that had become an urban legend in these parts, known only by cryptic symbols and fleeting shadows. In the hours that followed his arrival, Henry's innate sense of duty, honed by years of performing heroic roles on screen, took root in his heart. While his arrival had been intended as a simple visit to reconnect with his father and rediscover his roots, it soon became apparent that a darker drama was unfolding. The remnants of a freshly toppled scarecrow near the cornfield, the unsettling silence of the barn that once buzzed with activity, and the distant rumble of tires on gravel roads all converged into a tapestry of menace. Every element of the landscape now spoke of intrusion, a challenge that demanded more than idle concern. As dusk deepened, Henry wandered the property with measured steps, his eyes taking in every detail. The farm, usually a sanctuary of predictable rhythms, the rising sun over dew-kissed fields, the gentle clucking of chickens in their coop, and the low murmur of cattle in the barn, now felt like the stage for an impending confrontation. Amid the tall, whispering grasses and the tangled undergrowth near the boundary fence, he discovered subtle traces of forced entry and carelessly left behind debris. These were not the careless acts of mischievous teenagers but deliberate signs of intrusion. His mind, sharp and alert, began piecing together the clues like fragments of a long-forgotten mystery. The tension escalated as night fell, draping the countryside in a cloak of deep indigo and shadow. Henry took refuge in the old barn, now repurposed as a temporary command center, where remnants of farming equipment and weathered maps of the property bore silent testimony to past struggles. Here, amid the scent of old hay and rusted metal, he contemplated the events of the day. The quiet solitude was intermittently disturbed by the distant echoes of engines and murmurs carried by the wind, a reminder that the intruders, these enigmatic bandits, were still out there. Their presence, though not yet fully realized, hinted at a larger, more organized threat lurking behind the guise of rural mischief. The deeper Henry delved into the investigation of these disturbances, the more he recognized parallels to an adversary he had encountered in his past roles, a formidable enemy, methodical and relentless. Yet this was no fictional villain, this was real, and his family's legacy, entwined with the soil of Westwood, was at stake. The subtle clues, the inexplicable arrangement of scattered tools near the barn's entrance, the peculiar absence of footprints that would have otherwise betrayed human presence, and the distant flicker of torchlight at the far edge of the property, wove together a narrative of deliberate intimidation. Each element was part of a larger puzzle designed to destabilize the calm of the community and to signal that an unseen enemy had taken root. Even as the night deepened, the air thrummed with a latent energy that belied the outward calm. Henry's thoughts turned to the legends whispered among the locals, tales of bandits who had once roamed the back roads, now resurrected as harbingers of chaos and modern lawlessness. The rustic solitude of Westwood, once a haven of predictable routine, had become a battleground. In the interplay of moonlight and shadow, Henry recalled the quiet determination of his father, whose weathered face still carried the stoic resolve of a man who had faced countless hardships and had always chosen to endure rather than flee. That same quiet fortitude seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath his feet. Determined to uncover the truth, Henry spent the remainder of the night gathering scattered evidence and piecing together the timeline of the intrusions. Every rusted tool and every misaligned board of the old barn became a symbol of defiance, a silent chronicle of a struggle that was far from over. His mind raced with the possibilities. Were these acts random vandalism or part of a more sinister strategy aimed at seizing control of the land? And if it were the latter, who stood to gain from the subjugation of a quiet farming community steeped in tradition and familial legacy? In the pale light of the barn's single, dangling bulb, Henry's determination crystallized into resolve. He resolved to meet this challenge head-on, not only to defend his father's legacy but also to ensure that the spirit of Westwood remained unbroken. Every step he took in that hushed darkness echoed with the promise of retribution against those who dared disturb the sanctity of his father's land. There was a methodical precision in his movements as he reassembled the remnants of evidence, his mind mapping out possible approaches to thwart the intruders. The confrontation that loomed on the horizon was not just about reclaiming stolen ground, it was a battle for the very soul of a community whose heritage had been forged in the crucible of adversity. As the hours ebbed away and the first hints of dawn began to lighten the horizon, Henry emerged from the barn with a plan that was as unyielding as the ancient oaks that lined the property. The soft pre-dawn light revealed the stark outlines of the fields and the distant silhouettes of old windmills that had long since ceased their rotations, now silent sentinels of a bygone era. In that quiet moment, the weight of responsibility settled heavily upon him. His presence in Westwood was no longer merely that of a son reconnecting with his roots, it was that of a protector, a guardian who would stand firm against the rising tide of lawlessness. There was a deep irony in the situation. A celebrated actor, known across the world for his heroic portrayals, now found himself cast in a role that transcended the silver screen, a role that required authentic courage and steadfast resolve. The irony was not lost on him as he surveyed the land, now marked by both beauty and the scars of an emerging conflict. With each deliberate step toward the farmhouse, each careful observation of the traces left behind by the bandits, Henry felt the stirring of a long-dormant warrior spirit. It was as if the rhythms of the natural world, the rustling of the wind through the tall grass, the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet, were aligning to guide him toward an inevitable confrontation. In the solitude of that early morning, as the first birds began to sing and the chill of the new day touched his skin, Henry resolved that the battle to come would be fought not with the grandiose theatrics of blockbuster action scenes, but with the quiet, unyielding determination that comes from knowing one's heritage and the value of home. His journey, marked by the convergence of past and present, had transformed into a quest for justice that transcended the boundaries of fame and fortune. In that moment, under the awakening sky of Westwood, the stage was set for a conflict that would test not only his physical prowess but also the depth of his character, a battle where every blade of grass, every worn stone of the farmhouse, would stand witness to his unwavering commitment to defend what was rightfully his. And so, as the sun ascended over the horizon, bathing the land in the soft glow of hope and determination, Henry Cavill prepared to meet the challenge that lay ahead. The calm of the countryside was now a fragile veneer over a simmering cauldron of conflict, and the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. Yet within that uncertainty lay the promise of transformation, a chance for a once quiet town to rise anew against the tide of modern banditry. In the unfolding light of the new day, every shadow and every whisper hinted at a confrontation that would leave an indelible mark on the land, and on the heart of the man who had returned home to stand as its unyielding defender. Henry Cavill set about the day with a resolute determination, the soft glow of dawn gradually giving way to the steady light of morning. The once tranquil fields of Westwood now resonated with an undercurrent of tension as the memory of last night's ominous signs mingled with the promise of the new day. With measured steps, he left the farmhouse and walked along a narrow, well-worn dirt path that skirted the periphery of the farm. Each step stirred loose clods of earth, echoing the rhythmic pulse of his heartbeat, a steady reminder of the weighty responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. As he traversed the property, Henry observed the subtle signs of disruption left behind by the mysterious intruders. A broken piece of metal, half buried in the dew-soaked grass, hinted at a hasty departure, while faint tracks near an old, rusted tractor suggested that someone had been there only moments before. The morning air, cool and crisp, carried a faint odor of burnt wood and oil, a stark contrast to the earthy aroma of tilled soil and wildflowers that usually defined the landscape. In that quiet moment, the actor's mind worked with the precision of a seasoned detective, piecing together clues like fragments of a larger, sinister mosaic. The tranquility of the countryside was deceptive. Beneath its serene surface lay a brewing conflict that threatened to engulf the entire region. Henry recalled stories his father had once murmured about local gangs and shadowy figures who had long terrorized the outskirts of Westwood, tales that had once seemed like distant folklore. Now, these specters of the past had returned in a form more dangerous and calculated than ever before. Their arrival was marked not by brute force alone, but by an insidious blend of intimidation and covert sabotage, a modus operandi that suggested careful planning and a willingness to use any means necessary to seize control. In the growing light of day, Henry made his way to the modest barn that served as both storage and a repository of his father's memories. The building, with its creaking wooden beams and weathered metal roof, had witnessed countless seasons of planting and harvest, of both celebration and sorrow. Today, it was transformed into a de facto operations center. Inside, amidst stacks of old farming tools and faded maps, Henry began to arrange a rudimentary layout of the property, marking key locations that had shown signs of tampering. His fingers traced the outlines of the fields, the boundaries of the orchards, and the hidden paths leading into the wooded areas, each mark a silent vow to reclaim what had been disturbed. While the barn's interior hummed with the quiet sounds of nature and the distant calls of morning birds, Henry felt the pull of duty to inform his father of the ominous signs he had uncovered. Yet, he hesitated, understanding that his father's world was one of unspoken resilience and quiet endurance, not of overt alarm. Instead, Henry chose to carry on with his investigation, deciding to venture further into the surrounding countryside in search of additional clues that might reveal the identity and intentions of the intruders. He set out on a tractor that had seen better days, its engine sputtering to life under his practiced hand, and began to trace the outer limits of the property. The journey took him along winding backroads lined with ancient hedgerows and clusters of gnarled trees whose silhouettes stood stark against the morning sky. The further he ventured, the more he realized that the disturbances were not isolated incidents but part of a coordinated effort to undermine the local way of life. In a secluded copse of trees near a neglected orchard, he discovered evidence of recent activity, a makeshift camp, hastily dismantled, with remnants of discarded gear and faint scorch marks on the ground. It was as if the intruders had intended to leave no trace of their presence, yet in their haste, they had inadvertently revealed a trail of clues that spoke of deliberate intent and professional execution. Henry's mind raced as he considered the implications of these findings. The camp was positioned in a way that suggested a strategic advantage, allowing the bandits to monitor both the farm and the adjacent roadways. The location was chosen not by chance but by someone who understood the terrain intimately, a local with a grudge, perhaps, or an opportunist aiming to seize control of a region long known for its quiet defiance. The evidence of burning, too, was particularly troubling. It spoke of a desire to send a message, to purge any trace of resistance, and to intimidate those who might dare oppose the invaders. In that moment, Henry felt the familiar stirrings of a long-dormant resolve, a resolve that had been honed on movie sets and in the silent, determined moments between scenes, and which now surged to the forefront of his being. Returning to the farm, Henry found that the early morning light had transformed the landscape into a canvas of stark contrasts. The once familiar contours of the fields were now punctuated by subtle disruptions, a section of the fence bent unnaturally, a gate left ajar, and patches of trampled grass that told a story of hurried passage. Every detail was a clue, every anomaly a potential key to understanding the enemy's strategy. As he walked back along the property, his thoughts drifted to the legacy of Westwood, a legacy built on the sweat and toil of generations who had weathered nature's caprices and the occasional human threat alike. That legacy was now under siege, and it was up to him to protect it. The atmosphere around the farmhouse grew heavier as he neared the main building. A low, almost imperceptible hum of engines and machinery in the distance hinted at the presence of more organized forces. Henry's pulse quickened as he steeled himself for what lay ahead. It was not enough to gather evidence, he needed to understand the enemy's intentions. He resolved to make a cautious reconnaissance of the nearby town, where whispers of recent disturbances had reached even the quiet corners of Westwood. The town, a small collection of aging buildings and narrow streets, seemed at first to be a relic of a bygone era. Yet beneath its unassuming exterior lay an undercurrent of tension, a palpable unease that belied its outward serenity. In the town's modest main street, Henry found that even the locals wore expressions of guarded suspicion. A few familiar faces greeted him with nods that conveyed more than words ever could, a silent acknowledgement of the encroaching threat. The general ambience was one of cautious resignation, as if everyone already knew that the balance of power was shifting and that the coming days would bring uncertainty and upheaval. Henry walked slowly, absorbing every detail, the peeling paint on storefronts, the flickering neon sign above an old diner, the scattered remnants of what once might have been a vibrant community hub. Each element contributed to a growing narrative of decline and imminent conflict, a narrative that Henry was determined to rewrite. In a quiet corner of the town, near an abandoned service station, he discovered a small gathering of men engaged in hushed conversation. They were not the unruly criminals he had envisioned but rather local farmers and shopkeepers, their eyes reflecting both fear and a resolute determination to protect their way of life. Without exchanging a word, their body language spoke of shared loss and the collective burden of responsibility. The subtle glances and the quick, almost imperceptible shifts in posture confirmed what Henry had suspected: the bandits were not merely opportunists but part of a larger, orchestrated campaign aimed at undermining the region's economic and social fabric. While he continued his silent survey of the town, Henry's thoughts returned to the farm and the personal stakes that made this conflict all the more pressing. His father's weathered hands had built this life from the ground up, brick by brick, season by season, and now that foundation was being threatened by forces that cared little for legacy or honor. The contrast between his glamorous career and the rugged, unyielding reality of the countryside had always been stark, yet in moments like these, the line between fiction and reality blurred. The hero he had portrayed on the silver screen now found himself cast in a role that demanded authenticity, courage, and a profound sense of duty, a role that transcended celebrity and struck at the very heart of human resilience. As the morning wore on, the weight of responsibility became almost tangible. Henry returned to the farmhouse, his mind teeming with strategies and plans for resistance. He began to draft a mental blueprint of defenses, outlining ways to secure vulnerable points around the property and to alert the sparse network of loyal locals who still harbored hope for a return to normalcy. In the quiet solitude of the farmhouse's study, surrounded by faded photographs and mementos of a simpler past, he mapped out contingency plans with the meticulous care of a seasoned tactician. The plan was not one of violent retribution, but of strategic, measured resistance, a way to leverage the enduring spirit of the community against an enemy that relied on intimidation and disruption. Henry's thoughts turned to the possibility of reinforcements. Though he had arrived alone, he was not without allies in this small town. There were those who had weathered similar storms, individuals who had witnessed the ebb and flow of power in Westwood and understood that true strength lay not in force alone, but in unity and perseverance. In quiet conversations held under the veil of dawn, local figures had hinted at a network of support that extended beyond the visible confines of the town. Farmers, shopkeepers, even the old caretaker of the abandoned mill, a relic of industrial ambition, had all, in their own silent ways, expressed a willingness to stand against the encroaching menace. The notion of unity stirred something deep within Henry. It was a reminder that while individual valor was admirable, collective action was far more potent. The community of Westwood, with its intertwined histories and shared struggles, was a living testament to the idea that the strength of a people could triumph over even the most formidable odds. Inspired by this thought, Henry resolved that his efforts would not only be about safeguarding his father's land but about rekindling the indomitable spirit of a community that had long been battered by time and neglect. This was a fight for identity, for the preservation of a way of life that had once thrived amidst adversity. By midday, as the sun climbed high and the shadows retreated before its relentless glare, Henry found himself deep in contemplation, surrounded by the quiet hum of the farm coming back to life. The rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft murmur of local voices blended into a symphony of resilience that buoyed his determination. Every element of nature seemed to rally behind him, whispering tales of past victories and urging him forward. In that moment, Westwood was not just a backdrop for conflict, it was a character in its own right, with a rich, storied past that now served as a beacon for hope and renewal. There was a measured calm in the way the land revealed its secrets, a subtle, almost imperceptible alignment of nature's rhythms with the pulse of human courage. As Henry reassembled his thoughts and refocused on the task ahead, he understood that every decision, every step taken in defense of the farm and the town, was part of a grander narrative of transformation. The fight was not solely against a tangible enemy, but against the erosion of community values, against the insidious forces that sought to reduce Westwood to a mere footnote in the annals of modernity. With the afternoon drawing to a close, Henry Cavill returned once more to the farmhouse, this time with renewed vigor and a quiet determination that radiated from every pore. The familiar creak of the wooden door, the lingering scent of his father's presence in the well-worn chairs, and the comforting silence of a home that had weathered many storms provided both solace and a call to arms. The setting sun cast long shadows across the porch, each one a silent witness to the struggles of the past and a harbinger of the challenges yet to come. In that timeless space between day and night, the actor-turned-protector prepared to marshal every resource, every ounce of community spirit, to meet the threat head-on. In the subtle interplay of light and shadow that enveloped Westwood as dusk approached, the battle lines were quietly redrawn. Henry's eyes, now steeled with purpose, scanned the horizon, aware that the night would bring with it new dangers, and with it, the opportunity for bold action. The first hints of stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each one a distant echo of hope in a vast and uncertain universe. With a deep breath, he resolved that the coming hours would be dedicated to fortifying defenses, reaching out to the hidden allies within the town, and preparing for a confrontation that promised to test the very limits of human resolve. Thus, as the evening settled over Westwood in a cloak of deep indigo and silver light, Henry Cavill stood at the threshold of a battle that was as much about reclaiming a heritage as it was about confronting a modern menace. The stage was set for a conflict that would merge the quiet valor of the past with the unyielding determination of the present, a war fought not merely with brute strength, but with the enduring power of unity, strategy, and an unwavering belief in the strength of the human spirit. And so, beneath the watchful gaze of 1,000 ancient stars and the silent witness of the rugged landscape, the saga of Westwood continued, a narrative of resistance, of hope, and of an unbreakable bond between a man and the land he vowed to protect. Henry Cavill's determination deepened with the onset of night, as the shifting colors of dusk gave way to the deep indigo of early evening. The quietude of Westwood was punctuated by the steady throb of a community bracing for an unseen storm, and every breath of wind seemed to carry both the weight of history and the tremor of imminent conflict. In the fading light, Henry moved purposefully from the farmhouse to the small community hall at the edge of town, a modest building with time-worn walls that had once hosted celebrations and simple gatherings. Now repurposed as the nerve center for the resistance taking shape. Inside the hall, Henry found a congregation of local residents whose faces were etched with the quiet severity of those who had weathered many hardships. There was no theatrical display of allegiance here, rather, it was an unspoken bond, a mutual understanding that their collective future depended on standing together. The gathered townsfolk, a mix of elderly farmers, shopkeepers, and a few younger souls whose eyes still harbored cautious hope, listened intently as Henry moved among them. His presence, both commanding and reassuring, served as a catalyst for the subdued yet potent resolve that was slowly knitting the community into a single entity. Henry, ever the strategist, began to outline a plan for reinforcing the town's defenses. He moved with deliberate calm, examining the architectural quirks of the hall and the surrounding infrastructure. In one corner, remnants of old bulletin boards still clung to the wall, and in another, dusty maps, records of property boundaries and ancient roadways, were pinned in faded ink. With these as his guides, he charted out vulnerable points on the outskirts of Westwood where the bandits could potentially strike. His analytical mind, honed on film sets and steeped in years of cinematic heroism, now found itself in a far graver reality, the battle for the soul of his father's land and the enduring spirit of the community. Throughout the evening, Henry moved silently among the assembled, absorbing the collective memory of Westwood. Every creak of the wooden floor and every whisper among the crowd evoked recollections of bygone days when the community had been self-reliant and proud. The hall, though modest, exuded an air of stoic resistance. Here, every man and woman bore the scars of a past defined by hardship and perseverance, and together they embodied a resilient spirit that no external force could easily break. Henry's eyes took note of small details, the steady gaze of an old man who had seen too many winters, the determined set of a young woman whose family had tilled the soil for generations, and even the furtive nods of those who, though fearful, were prepared to defend their way of life. As the gathering unfolded, the air outside the hall pulsed with tension. The distant rumble of engines and the occasional flicker of headlights on gravel roads served as constant reminders of the intruder's looming presence. It was clear that these bandits were not aimless vandals, they were calculated in their approach, orchestrating a campaign to destabilize a community steeped in tradition and quiet dignity. Henry's mind raced with the realization that every action they took was methodical, a series of deliberate provocations aimed at eroding the community's unity and resolve. The meticulously placed disruptions across the farm and town were not random acts of vandalism but steps in a well-rehearsed play designed to intimidate and control. In a corner of the hall, by a window that framed the darkened fields beyond, Henry briefly paused to reflect on the stark contrast between his life as a celebrated actor and the raw reality before him. The glimmer of Hollywood glamour seemed worlds away as he focused on the tangible stakes of the present. Every detail, the earthy scent of wood and soil, the creak of the ancient beams overhead, and the quiet murmur of determined voices, served as a poignant reminder that heroism was not confined to the silver screen. Here, in the humble confines of Westwood, true valor was measured by one's willingness to stand firm against overwhelming odds, to protect one's home and heritage with nothing more than steadfast courage and collective resolve. As night fully descended, Henry and the assembled townsfolk dispersed into smaller groups, each tasked with specific responsibilities. Some were assigned to fortify the vulnerable perimeters of the town, using whatever materials were at hand, from old fences and wooden planks to the naturally imposing barriers of thick hedges and stone walls. Others were charged with maintaining a vigilant watch over the surrounding roads, ensuring that any movement in the darkness would be detected promptly. Henry himself took on the role of coordinating these efforts, moving from group to group with the quiet assurance of a leader who understood both strategy and the human cost of conflict. Outside the hall, the cool night air was punctuated by the low hum of activity. A small band of local mechanics and laborers gathered near an old service station, where they repurposed abandoned vehicles into makeshift barricades. Their hands, calloused by years of hard work, now moved with a singular purpose as they reinforced every entry point that could be exploited by the intruders. Henry observed them with a sense of profound respect. Here were ordinary people summoned to extraordinary heights by the dire circumstances of their time. Their efforts were not the stuff of blockbuster heroics, yet in their quiet determination lay the true spirit of resistance, unadorned, unyielding, and resolute. Under the pale glow of streetlights and scattered lanterns, Henry retraced his steps back to the farmhouse, his mind a swirling blend of tactical considerations and personal resolve. The landscape, illuminated by the soft radiance of moonlight, took on an almost surreal quality, a patchwork of shadow and light that mirrored the dual nature of the conflict, the encroaching darkness of lawlessness and the enduring light of communal solidarity. Along the way, he encountered signs of small, yet significant acts of defiance, a discarded can repurposed as a warning marker here, a hastily scrawled message on an old barn door there, each one a testament to the community's refusal to succumb quietly. In the solitude of the farmhouse's study, Henry allowed himself a moment to gather his thoughts. The room, filled with relics of family history, a collection of faded photographs, handwritten letters, and mementos of a simpler time, became a sanctuary of memory and resolve. He sat at a battered wooden desk, its surface scarred by the passage of time, and meticulously reviewed his notes and observations. Every detail was catalogued, the precise location of each disturbance, the estimated times of the intrusions, and the possible routes the bandits might take. It was a laborious process, yet every minute spent in analysis deepened his understanding of the enemy's strategy. The pattern emerging was clear, a series of calculated moves aimed at fracturing the community's unity, exploiting vulnerabilities, and ultimately seizing control of a region defined by its resilience. Henry's reflections were interrupted by the soft murmur of voices outside, quiet conversations among those who had come to share in the burden of defending their home. The farmhouse, usually a place of solitude and private thought, now pulsed with the energy of a community united by common purpose. In that moment, Henry realized that the battle ahead was not his alone to fight. The spirit of Westwood, nurtured by generations of steadfast determination, was alive in every person who had stepped forward to safeguard their shared legacy. It was this unity, this unspoken camaraderie forged in the crucible of hardship, that would ultimately determine the fate of the town. Resolute, he set aside his notes and donned a weathered jacket, a symbol of the rural life he had once taken for granted and one that now served as armor against the encroaching threat. With the cool night as his companion, Henry stepped outside into the open, where the fields stretched out in an endless tapestry of dark silhouettes and muted hues. Every rustle of the wind and every distant sound became a reminder that the enemy was ever present, watching, waiting. Yet in that moment, the vastness of the landscape also spoke of endless possibilities, the capacity to adapt, to resist, and to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Henry began a slow, deliberate patrol of the property, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. His steps were measured, each one echoing in the stillness of the night, as if marking a silent vow to defend every inch of the land. Along the way, he noted the small but significant efforts of those who had taken up arms against the threat, a dim light flickering behind a hastily reinforced shed, the muted clatter of tools being readied for defense. The coordinated whispers of strategy shared between neighbors. The communal effort was a mosaic of individual actions, each one contributing to the greater tapestry of resistance. It was a moment where the ordinary and the extraordinary converged, where the legacy of the past lent strength to the present struggle. The darkness, far from being a cloak for the enemy alone, became a canvas upon which the community painted its defiance. Henry's patrol took him along the perimeter of the farm, where the interplay of natural obstacles and human fortifications created a labyrinth of potential defensive positions. In the distance, the silhouettes of trees and rolling hills formed natural barriers, while closer to the farmhouse, improvised barricades and strategically placed watch posts added layers of security. Every element was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of a people unwilling to surrender their heritage without a fight. Throughout the long hours of the night, Henry's vigilance was unyielding. The passage of time was measured not by the ticking of a clock but by the steady accumulation of small victories, a guarded checkpoint here, an intercepted communication there, a thwarted attempt at infiltration. The enemy, it seemed, was growing more desperate, their movements marked by increasing haste and a growing sense of disarray. In contrast, the community's resistance was becoming a well-oiled machine of local knowledge and shared purpose, a force that, while lacking the flash of modern weaponry, possessed an indomitable spirit forged in the crucible of hardship. As dawn threatened to break through the darkness, Henry found himself once again standing at the threshold of the farmhouse, his body weary yet his resolve stronger than ever. The night had passed with its quiet moments of tension and subtle triumphs, each one reinforcing the belief that no matter how formidable the enemy might seem, the combined strength of a united community could not be easily overcome. In the early light of morning, as the first rays of sun began to filter through the clouds, Henry allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, a silent acknowledgement of the challenges that had been met and the battles yet to come. The unfolding hours would reveal whether the careful planning and collective effort would suffice to repel the insidious threat. Yet in that serene pre-dawn stillness, amid the quiet hum of a community awakened to its own potential, Henry Cavill understood that the true heart of Westwood was not defined by the scars of past invasions but by the enduring resilience of its people. Each step taken on that hallowed ground was a testament to a legacy that refused to yield, a legacy of unity, courage, and the timeless belief that, even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the light of hope could never be extinguished. And so, with the promise of a new day dawning over the rugged horizon, Henry Cavill resolved to press forward, guided by the unyielding spirit of Westwood and the steadfast determination of a community that had long learned to thrive against all odds. The night had been a crucible of resistance, and as the first glimmers of sunlight touched the land, it became clear that the battle was far from over, but the seeds of victory had already been sown in the hearts of those who dared to stand together. Henry Cavill's determination to defend Westwood now found itself tested in the relentless heat of a late summer afternoon. The sun hung low in a sky streaked with molten gold and deep crimson, casting elongated shadows across the fields and painting the landscape in a palette of both beauty and foreboding. In this harsh light, every furrow in the soil and every weathered barn spoke of decades of perseverance, yet also of the scars left by past incursions. The air was thick with the scent of ripening wheat and the lingering trace of smoke from last night's clandestine fires. Though the community had rallied with stoic resolve, Henry sensed that the enemy's tactics were evolving, and the calm after the storm was but the lull before the next onslaught. As the day progressed, Henry moved through Westwood like a silent sentinel. With the farmhouse firmly behind him, he set out to survey the farthest reaches of his father's property. He traversed winding dirt roads that meandered through expansive fields and over ancient stone walls, each step a reminder of the legacy that had been nurtured on this land. The once familiar landscape now seemed imbued with a layer of tension, a palpable energy that whispered secrets of both nature and human conflict. In the distance, beyond the modest cluster of farm buildings and weather-beaten silos, the outline of a derelict windmill stirred in the shimmering heat, its once proud blades now motionless relics of a bygone era. Yet even this silent monument seemed to harbor memories of struggle, its creaking timbers and rusted gears testifying to a time when every structure in Westwood had fought to endure. Henry's inspection of the outer fields led him to a secluded copse of trees, a natural enclave that had served as both refuge and lookout for the local farmers. Here, beneath the thick canopy of leaves, he discovered fresh tracks, traces of tires pressed into soft, churned earth and footprints that vanished abruptly into the underbrush. The evidence was unmistakable, the bandits had been moving with purpose, and their routes suggested a methodical plan that extended well beyond random acts of vandalism. Each impression in the soil, every dislodged stone along a forgotten path, was a fragment of a larger puzzle that hinted at an enemy both patient and organized. With measured steps, Henry documented the signs, mentally noting their positions and integrating them into the evolving map of this clandestine war. Back at the farmhouse, a gust of wind stirred the fields, carrying with it a swirl of dust and distant voices that mingled with the chirping of crickets. Inside, the old wooden desk that had served as his command center was now cluttered with handwritten notes, detailed sketches of the property, and hastily drawn diagrams that attempted to connect the dots between the bandits' movements and the vulnerabilities of the land. Henry's gaze lingered on a faded family portrait pinned to the wall, a reminder of the generations who had built this life from the bare earth. Their legacy was not merely one of hardship but also of quiet resilience, an unspoken vow that the blood and sweat poured into these fields would not be squandered without a fight. In a determined bid to unravel the enemy's strategy, Henry resolved to extend his reconnaissance beyond the immediate boundaries of his father's holdings. He ventured into the neighboring woodlands where the land met the untamed forest, a place where nature held sway and secrets festered among the twisted roots and ancient trees. The forest was a labyrinth of intertwining paths and hidden clearings, where light and shadow danced in perpetual motion. Here, Henry discovered evidence that the bandits had not only breached the farm but had also established a temporary outpost. A series of hastily erected shelters, camouflaged under tarps and abandoned equipment, marked the edge of a clearing. The structures were crude and transient, yet they bore the unmistakable signs of careful planning, strategically positioned to offer a clear view of the surrounding terrain, with paths leading directly toward the main road that connected Westwood to the wider world. Every detail of the camp told a story of calculated menace. Abandoned crates, hastily stacked and partially burned, lay scattered around the perimeter. A broken lantern flickered weakly, its shattered glass catching the intermittent rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy. It was evident that the enemy had been here not long ago, and their hurried departure left behind a trail of clues that both confirmed their presence and hinted at a larger, more complex operation. As Henry meticulously surveyed the scene, his mind churned with possibilities. Were these merely opportunistic raiders exploiting a moment of vulnerability, or were they part of an orchestrated campaign aimed at seizing control of a region where tradition and modernity clashed in a battle for survival? The question lingered like a dark cloud over the forest, and the answer would shape the next phase of his strategy. In the hours that followed, Henry returned to the farmhouse with a heavy but resolute heart. The day's discoveries had deepened the mystery and underscored the urgency of a swift, coordinated response. With the local community already mobilized from the previous night's meeting, he convened a council in the cool, shadowed interior of the farmhouse's old barn, a space that had witnessed the passage of countless seasons and now bore the solemn weight of impending conflict. Around a rough-hewn table scarred by time and use, a small group of trusted locals gathered. Their faces, lined with the hardships of rural life, were etched with a mixture of worry and defiance. Although words were sparse and measured, the air was thick with unspoken understanding. Each person present had, in their own quiet way, contributed to the fabric of Westwood's legacy, a legacy now threatened by forces that sought to dismantle the community from within. Henry, his deep-set eyes reflecting both the burden of leadership and the spark of unwavering resolve, laid out the intelligence he had gathered. The details of the outer fields, the signs in the copse, and the evidence in the forest were woven together into a coherent narrative that pointed to a deliberate campaign of territorial undermining. The bandits, it became increasingly clear, were not random marauders but calculated operatives with the intent to destabilize the local order, exploit vulnerabilities, and ultimately impose their own brand of control over the region. His voice, steady and clear, resonated through the silent room, every word imbued with the authority of experience and the urgency of a man who had long since left the world of make-believe behind to confront a tangible, existential threat. The meeting dissolved into hushed conversations as plans were set in motion. Several of the local farmers volunteered to double their patrols, while others, whose expertise lay in the old crafts of the land, began reinforcing the natural and man-made defenses along the perimeter of Westwood. Henry's own role evolved from that of a lone guardian to a coordinator of communal resistance. He entrusted small teams with specific tasks, mapping additional escape routes, setting up discreet observation posts, and even discreetly rallying neighboring communities that might lend support in the coming days. The strength of Westwood, Henry insisted, lay not only in its physical defenses but in the indomitable spirit of its people, a spirit that had weathered the storms of nature and the trials of history. After the meeting, as twilight descended once more upon the rugged landscape, Henry set out on a solitary mission to gather further intelligence. Under the cover of darkness, he retraced his steps along the outer boundaries, his presence nearly ghost-like as he moved through the fields. The crisp night air was alive with the sounds of nocturnal life, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, and the soft, almost imperceptible murmur of wind through the trees. It was in this quiet solitude that Henry felt the full weight of responsibility, his every step a silent promise to uphold the legacy of his forefathers and to protect the future of Westwood from those who sought to claim it by force. His patrol led him to a narrow, overgrown trail that cut through a copse of birch trees, a natural corridor that provided both cover and a vantage point over a stretch of open farmland. From this hidden perch, he observed movements in the distance, shadows shifting against the horizon, the slow, deliberate progress of figures that appeared to be surveying the land. The precision of their movements, the calculated way in which they navigated the terrain, confirmed his worst suspicions. These were not mere vandals acting in the chaos of opportunistic theft, they were organized, methodical, and intent on challenging the very order of life in Westwood. As he watched, the silhouettes moved with an eerie synchrony, a dance of predation under the indifferent gaze of the moon. Henry's heart pounded in rhythm with the silent pulse of the land, a beat that spoke of ancient battles fought on soil stained by both sacrifice and hope. Every moment in that frozen tableau intensified his resolve. Every passing minute a reminder that the enemy's time was as relentless as the tide. He recorded the details mentally, the angles of approach, the likely escape routes, and the positions that would require immediate reinforcement. His mind, sharpened by years of acting in heroic roles, now served as the command center of a genuine struggle, a struggle for the very soul of a community steeped in tradition. By the time Henry retraced his steps back to the farmhouse, the early stirrings of dawn were beginning to break the night's hold. The sky was a canvas of muted blues and soft grays, promising another day of uncertainty and challenge. Though fatigue weighed on his limbs, his spirit was unbowed. Every encounter, every observation, had reinforced his belief in the righteousness of the fight ahead. In the quiet solitude of the early morning, he allowed himself a brief moment of introspection, a silent communion with the land and the memories of those who had come before him. The faces of his ancestors, the steady hands of his father, and the unyielding will of a people united against the encroaching darkness filled his thoughts. It was a reminder that while the enemy might possess modern tactics and fleeting technological advantages, they could never extinguish the ancient, enduring flame of community spirit and human resilience. With the new day unfolding before him, Henry returned once more to the farmhouse, where plans were already being refined and strategies adjusted based on the intelligence gathered during the long night. The farmhouse, a living repository of family lore and quiet determination, now buzzed with an energy born of necessity and unity. Every room, every corridor, seemed to echo with the unspoken promise of resistance, a promise that no matter how formidable the enemy might be, the people of Westwood would stand together, their legacy written not in fear, but in the indomitable strength of their collective resolve. Thus, as the morning sun climbed higher and bathed the land in a determined light, Henry Cavill prepared himself for the challenges that lay ahead. With each step, each carefully drawn line on a weathered map, and every whispered word of encouragement shared among the villagers, the battle for Westwood was being waged not only on the physical terrain but in the very hearts of its people. In that moment, the legacy of a humble farming community and the spirit of generations converged, forging a resistance that was as resolute as the ancient oak trees that lined the property. The stage was set for a confrontation that would push the boundaries of courage and sacrifice. Henry's journey, marked by both the burden of his past and the promise of a future reclaimed, continued unabated, every moment steeped in the bittersweet recognition that true heroism was not defined by cinematic glory alone, but by the quiet, relentless commitment to defend what one holds dear. And so, with the rising sun as his silent ally and the resilient heartbeat of Westwood echoing in his ears, Henry Cavill embarked on the next phase of his arduous mission, a mission to confront the enemy, restore the sanctity of his father's land, and ultimately, to kindle the spark of hope that would light the way for an entire community determined to reclaim its destiny. Henry Cavill's journey pressed onward into a realm where the fabric of day-to-day existence was slowly being unraveled by the relentless pressure of an enemy that had grown ever more brazen. As mid-morning settled into a sweltering afternoon, the once quiet pastoral rhythms of Westwood began to throb with the frenetic energy of a community on the brink of confrontation. The fields, bathed in a harsh, unyielding sunlight, revealed every imperfection in the land, a patch of wilted crops here, a barren strip of earth there, each a silent testament to the strain inflicted by the encroaching marauders. In the distance, a series of low, rumbling engines announced the arrival of reinforcements from the enemy, their approach marked by the thudding pulse of heavy machinery that threatened to shatter the delicate equilibrium painstakingly maintained by the town's inhabitants. Henry's resolve. Already fortified by long hours of nocturnal vigilance and strenuous reconnaissance, now faced the challenge of mobilizing a defense that could withstand the organized onslaught. With the sun at its zenith, he set out once again from the farmhouse, his every step measured and deliberate. The dusty road that led from his father's land to the town center had become a corridor of purpose, a path along which the collective determination of Westwood flowed like a silent river. Along this route, Henry noted the subtle transformations wrought by the enemy's presence, barricades hastily erected from scavenged materials, stray remnants of modern technology clashing with the ancient contours of the landscape, and cryptic symbols crudely painted on weathered walls that served as grim markers of territory. Each sign was a piece in an ominous puzzle, a harbinger of an adversary that was adapting and evolving beyond mere opportunism into something far more calculated. In the bustling center of town, the scene was a study in contrast. Here, the legacy of Westwood's rich history was laid bare alongside the stark intrusion of modern chaos. The local general store, once a warm gathering place brimming with everyday comforts, now stood as a fortified outpost. Its windows, shuttered with heavy planks, and its doors, reinforced with layers of metal, bore the unmistakable look of a structure repurposed for defense. Henry moved through the narrow streets with a quiet urgency, his eyes meticulously scanning every shadow, every slight movement that might betray the presence of an enemy operative. The town's denizens, though visibly wary, had begun to organize themselves with a methodical precision that belied their humble origins. Groups of residents, farmers, shopkeepers, and even a few local artisans, had banded together, each assuming roles dictated by their unique skills. They were clearing debris to reinforce doorways, stacking old barrels and crates to create makeshift barricades, and positioning themselves as sentinels along the main thoroughfare. This grassroots militancy was not born of military training but of the fierce, primal need to preserve a way of life that had been cultivated over generations. Henry's observations led him to the old mill on the outskirts of town, a relic of a bygone era that now functioned as a strategic vantage point. The mill, its water wheel long stilled and its walls weathered by time, had been transformed into an improvised lookout. From this elevated position, Henry could survey vast stretches of the surrounding countryside, noting the coordinated movements of enemy vehicles along the distant highway. The sight of these mechanical behemoths, their engines idling and headlights piercing the haze of the afternoon, was a stark reminder that the enemy was not a scattered, disorganized force but an orchestrated machine, intent on imposing their will upon the land. As the day advanced, the heat became oppressive, a relentless force that seemed to mirror the mounting tension. Yet in this crucible of extreme conditions, the resolve of Westwood's people crystallized. Henry convened an impromptu gathering near the town square, where a faded statue of an old local hero, long forgotten by modern society, served as a silent testament to the enduring spirit of the community. There, without the need for grandiose declarations, a series of unspoken agreements passed among those present. Their faces, etched with lines of worry and determination, conveyed volumes about the stakes of the moment. Henry's presence, imbued with the gravitas of both his cinematic past and the hard-won wisdom of recent nights, lent an almost tangible energy to the proceedings. Without resorting to overt proclamations, he communicated a simple, powerful truth, that the survival of Westwood depended on every individual's willingness to stand fast against the tide of invasion. In the hours that followed, preparations unfolded with a quiet efficiency that was as inspiring as it was practical. Henry moved among the various groups, lending his expertise to reinforce makeshift defenses and coordinating subtle, coded signals for communication. The rustic charm of Westwood, its sprawling fields, time-worn barns, and ancient trees, became an integral part of the defensive strategy. Natural barriers were harnessed and augmented by human ingenuity, ditches were deepened, and thorny hedges were meticulously aligned to create obstacles that would slow any advancing enemy. Every stone and every patch of earth became a weapon in the hands of a people united by necessity and the fierce desire to protect their heritage. Yet even as the community's preparations reached a crescendo, Henry's thoughts were haunted by the knowledge that the enemy was not merely content with physical domination. Intelligence gathered during previous patrols had revealed that the marauders had access to modern communication devices and surveillance technology, tools that allowed them to monitor local activities with alarming precision. This realization spurred Henry to institute a counterintelligence protocol. Working quietly with a trusted few, he established a network of discreet observers and message runners whose sole purpose was to intercept and misdirect any enemy communications. In hushed tones and by the light of hidden lanterns, these small teams coordinated the collection of vital information, ensuring that every advance of the enemy was noted and countered before it could disrupt the fragile equilibrium that the community was striving to maintain. The afternoon deepened into an almost surreal interplay of light and shadow as Henry continued his rounds. The interplay of sunlight and the encroaching gloom of distant clouds lent an eerie quality to the landscape, as if the very heavens were aware of the unfolding struggle below. Amid this atmospheric tension, Henry's mind worked ceaselessly, mapping escape routes, calculating angles of approach, and anticipating enemy maneuvers with the precision of a chess master planning several moves ahead. His reflections turned to the nature of power and resistance, how modern forces, equipped with technology and impersonal strategies, could sometimes overlook the unpredictable, raw strength of human determination. Westwood, with its unyielding spirit and intimate connection to the land, was a force that could not be easily subjugated. It was this innate connection, a blend of memory, history, and an almost sacred bond with the soil, that Henry believed would prove to be the community's most potent weapon. By late afternoon, as the temperature began to dip slightly and the oppressive heat gave way to a more forgiving warmth, Henry's efforts coalesced into a renewed sense of purpose. With the enemy's movements now clearly visible on the horizon and the local defenses firmly in place, he reconvened with the core group of community leaders at the farmhouse. In the cool interior of the study, a room that had borne silent witness to both joyous celebrations and the quiet despair of hard-won losses, he reviewed the day's intelligence. Maps, hastily sketched diagrams, and lists of observed enemy positions cluttered the large, scarred table. There was a palpable sense of urgency as strategies were debated and contingency plans refined. Every suggestion, every observation, was weighed carefully against the backdrop of a landscape that was both a cherished home and a battleground. In that room, the dichotomy of past and present collided with startling clarity. Henry reflected on the irony that had brought him from the glimmering heights of Hollywood to the rugged, unyielding reality of rural defense. The roles he had once played on screen were now being lived out in a manner that was far more consequential, where the stakes were measured not by box office returns but by the very survival of a community's soul. His leadership was no longer a matter of performance but of genuine responsibility, and every decision carried the weight of legacy and honor. It was a burden he bore with quiet dignity, knowing that the actions of this day would echo in the lives of those who had inherited the land, just as the sacrifices of those who came before him had paved the way for this moment. As the day drew inexorably toward dusk, the sky transformed into a canvas of deepening blues and vibrant oranges, a visual metaphor for the transition from the fervor of battle to the solemn vigilance of night. The community's defenses, now bolstered by the collective will of its people and the intricate planning of its reluctant hero, stood ready to meet the enemy's advance. Henry, standing at the threshold of the farmhouse and gazing out over the fields that had been both a playground of his youth and the stage of his newfound mission, felt a profound connection to the land and its people. In that fleeting moment, as the last light of day surrendered to the encroaching twilight, he knew that the forthcoming night would be a test unlike any other, a crucible in which the strength of Westwood and the unyielding resolve of its defenders would be laid bare. Thus, as the shadows lengthened and the first stars timidly emerged in the evening sky, the stage was set for the next chapter of this unfolding struggle. The enemy, aware that they were now contending not with a mere collection of isolated individuals but with a community united by purpose and steeped in history, began to marshal their forces for what promised to be a decisive encounter. Henry Cavill, at the forefront of this resistance, carried with him not only the tactical acumen honed through years of cinematic heroics but also the raw, indomitable spirit of a man determined to safeguard the legacy of his father's land. With each measured step toward the inevitable confrontation, the heartbeat of Westwood throbbed in unison with his own, a testament to the timeless truth that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the human spirit can rise, resilient and unbroken, to defend what is most precious. Under the shroud of twilight, as the encroaching darkness merged with the residual glow of the sunset, the battle lines in Westwood became ever more distinctly drawn. The silence before the storm was a tangible presence, a heavy pause that resonated through the fields, the dilapidated structures, and even the ancient trees that had witnessed generations of hardship and triumph. In that pregnant pause, Henry Cavill moved with the deliberate caution of a man who knew that every minute could tip the balance between salvation and ruin. The air, already heavy with the scent of earth and sweat, now bore a sharp tang of anticipation, as if the land itself was bracing for the clash that was soon to come. Henry had spent the last few hours meticulously coordinating with the local resistance, ensuring that every available resource was poised for the imminent confrontation. The farmhouse, transformed into a command post over the previous day, now hummed with a quiet urgency. Men and women, their faces etched with a mixture of resolve and trepidation, moved with purpose in the dim light. Makeshift radios and outdated communication devices crackled with sporadic updates, each transmission a reminder of the enemy's advancing presence. The enemy was not a faceless horde, but a well-organized force that had methodically infiltrated the rural outskirts, using modern tools and ancient guile in equal measure. As dusk deepened into a near blackness punctured only by the trembling light of scattered lanterns and a smattering of stubborn stars, Henry led a small reconnaissance team toward a ridge that overlooked the main thoroughfare. From that vantage point, they could see the far side of the valley where the enemy's silhouettes moved in disciplined formation. The figures, dark and indistinct against the horizon, advanced with a precision that belied their rugged appearance. Their vehicles, modified pickup trucks and a few battered SUVs, appeared almost ghost-like in the flickering light, their headlights muted by the dust and darkness. Henry's pulse quickened as he observed their formation, mentally overlaying the positions on a hastily drawn map. Each detail, from the angular turn of a vehicle to the measured steps of a lone scout, was recorded with a keen awareness that every nuance could be the key to anticipating their next move. The reconnaissance team retreated silently to relay the intelligence back to the command center. In the cool confines of the farmhouse's back room, Henry pored over the new information. The enemy was advancing in multiple contingents, converging on key access routes that would allow them to encircle Westwood. A sense of urgency gripped him, a realization that this was not a mere raiding party, but the vanguard of a larger campaign to subdue the region and strip the community of its identity. The meticulous planning of the enemy was matched only by the raw determination of Westwood's people, a fact that both buoyed and burdened him with responsibility. It was a responsibility not just to repel the invaders, but to uphold the heritage of a land that had nurtured generations of resilience and mutual support. Outside, the night was alive with both natural sounds and the mechanical murmurs of the enemy's approach. The wind whispered secrets through the tall grasses, carrying with it the faint echoes of distant engines and the occasional clatter of loose equipment. Henry stepped outside for a moment of solitude, seeking solace under the vast, starlit sky. In that brief interlude, he allowed his mind to wander back to the moments that had brought him here, a journey that had taken him from the bright lights of Hollywood to the raw, unyielding reality of rural life. Every step he had taken on these weathered roads, every whispered conversation with a wary local, had led to this moment. The weight of legacy pressed upon him, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing force that he carried with each measured stride. As he contemplated the enormity of the task ahead, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle snapped him back to the present. Quickly, he moved to a concealed vantage point near the edge of the property, his senses heightened by adrenaline and years of training that now served him in a reality far removed from scripted heroics. There, amidst the shadows cast by gnarled oak trees and the remnants of an old fence, he watched as one of the enemy scouts dismounted from a truck and moved cautiously along a narrow trail. Every movement, every deliberate pause, spoke of the enemy's intent to secure a foothold before the full-scale assault. Henry noted the scout's gear, a mix of modern tactical equipment intermingled with improvised armor, and the way he communicated silently with a partner positioned a short distance away. This was no random band of thieves, it was a force that had adapted to the environment, blending modern warfare techniques with the unpredictable nuances of rural conflict. The scout's passage provided Henry with a crucial window into the enemy's strategy. He recognized that the invaders intended to cut off the town's escape routes and isolate key defensive positions before launching their main assault. This insight spurred a flurry of activity back at the command center. Henry's trusted lieutenants, seasoned locals who had long managed the practical affairs of Westwood, began reassigning teams to fortify not only the central gathering points but also the lesser-known, narrow passageways that crisscrossed the countryside. Every road, every trail, was now a potential battleground. The community's resistance was becoming an intricate web of localized defenses, each link vital to preventing the enemy from exploiting any single vulnerability. In a dimly lit room that served as the operations hub, Henry meticulously updated the communal map, marking enemy positions and anticipated routes of attack. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of cautious optimism and steely determination. Even as fear lurked in the periphery, the shared purpose of the gathered townsfolk transformed that fear into a rallying cry. Every whispered word of encouragement, every nod of solidarity, underscored the collective will to preserve not just property or livelihood, but the very soul of Westwood. Henry's presence, both commanding and deeply human, served as the glue that bound this disparate group of individuals into a cohesive unit, a unit capable of standing firm against a foe that had underestimated the quiet power of unity and tradition. Outside the farmhouse, the enemy's presence began to materialize more distinctly. The previously observed silhouettes moved closer, their formations tightening like the coils of a predatory snake. Henry's intuition, sharpened by both instinct and the cumulative weight of his experiences, told him that the enemy was preparing to strike before long. He gathered his closest advisors for a final briefing, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of a single lantern, each expression reflecting the gravity of the impending confrontation. With deliberate calm, he outlined the contingency plans, a multi-pronged defense that relied on both brute force and guerrilla tactics, designed to exploit the enemy's over-reliance on technology and modern coordination. The plan was to engage the enemy in a series of hit-and-run encounters that would disrupt their formation, slow their advance, and create openings for a counteroffensive. In this strategy, every member of the community, from the seasoned farmer to the nimble messenger, played a critical role. As the briefing concluded, Henry stepped out onto the porch of the farmhouse, where the cool night air met the residual warmth of the day. He stood there for a long moment, gazing out over the darkened fields that lay like an uncharted map before him. The quiet was punctuated by distant sounds, a low murmur of engines, the soft rustle of leaves, and the occasional, almost imperceptible creak of old wood. It was in this stillness that Henry found clarity. The coming battle was not merely about repelling invaders, but about reaffirming a way of life that had been forged over generations. The land, with all its scars and silent victories, was a repository of memories and dreams, a repository that could never be fully conquered as long as its people were willing to fight for it. The hours that followed were a blur of coordinated movements and whispered exchanges. Under the cover of darkness, small teams slipped into the interstitial spaces of Westwood, positioning themselves along critical junctures and preparing to launch preemptive strikes. The enemy, unaware of the full extent of the local network's vigilance, moved with an overconfidence that bordered on arrogance. Each maneuver they executed was met with a countermeasure that disrupted their rhythm, a well-timed diversion here, a strategically placed barricade there, each one a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of a community that had long learned to fight for its survival without the luxuries of modern weaponry. In the midst of this intricate dance of offense and defense, Henry himself led a select group toward a key intersection, a narrow pass between an abandoned orchard and a rocky outcrop that provided a natural choke point. The air was thick with tension as they advanced quietly, each step measured and deliberate. From their hidden vantage, they observed enemy patrols moving methodically along the main road, their paths illuminated sporadically by the flash of headlights. With practiced precision, Henry's team intercepted a communication signal, a short burst of static punctuated by an unfamiliar code, that confirmed the enemy's plan to launch a simultaneous attack from multiple directions. The confirmation sent a shiver of urgency through the group. The enemy was coordinating a full-scale assault, one that would test the mettle of Westwood's defenders to the utmost. Before the assault could commence, a sudden, piercing sound shattered the oppressive silence, a siren, distant yet unmistakable, slicing through the night air. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to slow as both sides braced for the coming clash. In that charged instant, Henry felt the full force of destiny upon his shoulders. The siren, an eerie precursor to the chaos that was about to erupt, underscored the inevitability of conflict, a conflict that was as much about reclaiming the spirit of a community as it was about fending off a modern enemy. With a deep, resolute breath, Henry signaled his team to fall back into position, each member disappearing into the labyrinthine network of trenches, hidden pathways, and natural covers that had been painstakingly prepared. The enemy, now fully aware of the gathering resistance, began to converge with renewed determination. The first shots rang out, a staccato burst that echoed off the ancient stone walls of the farmhouse and the surrounding hills. The night erupted into a cacophony of noise, the crack of rifle fire, the clamor of improvised explosives, and the shouts of both attackers and defenders. All melding into a symphony of conflict that reverberated through the very soul of Westwood. Amid the turmoil, Henry moved like a man possessed by both duty and destiny. Every decision, every maneuver, was guided by an unyielding commitment to protect the legacy of the land he had come to cherish. The battle that night was not fought on a grand stage of cinematic heroics. It was a raw, visceral struggle where the cost of each moment was measured in sweat, blood, and the fragile hope of survival. In the heat of combat, as enemy forces pressed forward with the relentless determination of modern warriors, the people of Westwood responded with a fierce, almost primal resilience. They fought not with the cold precision of machines, but with the burning passion of those who know that their very identity depends on the land beneath their feet. For hours, the clash raged on, a relentless series of skirmishes, ambushes, and desperate defensive stands. Henry's mind, honed by years in front of the camera and tempered now by real-world conflict, orchestrated movements with the precision of a seasoned tactician. His eyes, reflecting the flickering light of explosions and the grim determination of his comrades, surveyed the chaos with unwavering focus. Every encounter was a battle of wills, a contest between the calculated modernity of the enemy and the raw, time-honored spirit of a community united by history. And as the night deepened, it became increasingly clear that the heart of Westwood, the unbreakable bond between its people and their land, was the one force that no enemy could ever truly conquer. In the midst of the fray, moments of quiet heroism shone through the darkness. A farmer, his weathered hands steady despite the chaos, led a charge that turned a seemingly doomed outpost into a bastion of resistance. A young messenger, barely more than a boy, risked everything to carry critical information across enemy lines, his footsteps echoing with the promise of hope. Even as the enemy's numbers threatened to overwhelm the defenders, each small victory, the repulsion of a surprise attack here, the successful interception of a key enemy unit there, wove together into a tapestry of defiance that defied the odds. As the first light of dawn began to chase away the remnants of night, the battlefield gradually fell into a somber lull. The echoes of gunfire subsided, replaced by the quiet murmur of weary voices and the soft lament of a community that had borne the brunt of violence. Amid the swirling dust and smoke, Henry Cavill stood amidst the ruins and the resolute faces of those who had fought by his side. Though the enemy had not been completely repelled, the night's battle had sown the seeds of a larger, enduring resistance, a resistance built not on the fleeting might of modern armaments, but on the timeless strength of unity, tradition, and the unyielding human spirit. In that fragile, tentative calm of early morning, as the sun's rays broke over the horizon and illuminated the scars of the land, Henry knew that the struggle for Westwood was far from over. The events of the night had only deepened his resolve to protect the legacy of his father's land and the enduring spirit of a community that refused to bow to tyranny. Every scar etched into the earth, every whispered memory of past hardships, was now a testament to a battle that was as much about reclaiming identity as it was about defending territory. With the coming day, new challenges and unforeseen trials would emerge. But as Henry surveyed the battered yet unbowed defenders and the resilient terrain of Westwood, he felt an unwavering certainty that, united in purpose and driven by an unbreakable bond with their heritage, they would prevail. The dawn heralded not just a new day, but the promise of a future in which the spirit of the land, and its people, could rise again, indomitable and unyielding, against any force that dared threaten its sacred soil. And so, amid the soft glow of morning and the lingering echoes of battle, Henry Cavill prepared himself for the long road ahead, a road marked by sacrifice, courage, and the steadfast belief that true heroism is found in the quiet determination to protect one's home, heritage, and the enduring light of hope. As the embers of the night's battle gradually cooled beneath the early light of a resolute dawn, the battered yet unyielding spirit of Westwood stirred anew. Henry Cavill, standing amidst the remnants of hastily erected barricades and the scattered debris of conflict, surveyed the landscape with eyes that held both the weight of loss and the burning promise of reclamation. The fields, scarred by the previous night's tumult, began to shimmer with the soft luminescence of dew, a quiet testament to nature's unfailing cycle of renewal. Even as the scent of smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of tilled soil and the fresh promise of rain, there was an unmistakable air of determination. The community, though visibly weary, had not yielded. Instead, their resolve had crystallized into a collective force that now pulsed through every furrow and stone. In the wake of the clash, the people of Westwood emerged from their makeshift shelters with measured steps and hearts buoyed by a shared sense of purpose. The day had not brought an outright victory, but it had illuminated both the strengths and vulnerabilities of their defenses. Henry, ever the vigilant guardian, moved through the early morning light with an intensity that belied the exhaustion etched on his face. His mind raced with tactical assessments as he noted the enemy's retreat in some sectors, the gaps left in their lines, and the unmistakable signs of disorganization that hinted at a faltering assault. Yet, within these quiet victories lay the seeds of a far more daunting challenge, a determination among the enemy to regroup, rearm, and renew their assault with a fiercer resolve. Henry gathered the local leaders in the central barn, a vast structure that now served not only as a shelter but as the nerve center of their resistance. The interior, once filled with the low hum of daily chores, now resonated with the fervent murmur of strategic discussions. Maps, annotated with the scars of battle and the positions of both friend and foe, were spread out on an ancient oak table, their ink smeared by anxious fingers and the dampness of early dawn. In this gathering, each individual spoke without words, a farmer's nod, a shopkeeper's steady gaze, and the determined silence of those who had lost much yet refused to succumb to despair. Their unspoken communication formed a tapestry of resilience that transcended the need for grand proclamations. Henry's leadership now took on a dual role, that of the strategist and the inspirer. He addressed the gathered community in a tone that was both reflective and stirring, his words laced with the gravity of their shared history and the hopeful promise of a future reclaimed. In his mind, every setback from the previous night was not a defeat but a lesson, a piece of a larger puzzle that, when assembled, would reveal the true nature of the enemy's ambitions. The enemy's methods, though modern and methodical, could not account for the unpredictable ingenuity born of decades of living in harmony with the land. Westwood, with its labyrinth of natural hideaways, winding dirt roads, and weather-beaten structures, was not merely a target, it was a fortress of tradition and community, each element a bulwark against those who sought to dismantle its heritage. As the morning matured into a bright, clear day, the community set about repairing the tangible wounds of the night's violence. Groups were dispatched to clear the remnants of enemy equipment from the roads, while others busied themselves with fortifying vulnerable points along the perimeter. In every action, there was a sense of purpose that transcended mere survival. It was an affirmation of identity, a declaration that Westwood, with all its imperfections and scars, would continue to thrive. Henry worked alongside the townsfolk, his presence both a comfort and a call to arms. With every nail hammered into weathered wood and every stone repositioned to bolster a makeshift wall, he felt the legacy of his father's farm and the spirit of generations past intermingling with his own resolve. Each repair was a quiet act of defiance against the encroaching forces that had sought to sow discord and fear. Yet, even in the midst of reconstruction, intelligence reports filtered in, subtle signs that the enemy, though momentarily repelled, had not abandoned their ambitions. Scouting parties reported unusual movements along the distant ridge, where the skeletal remains of an old communication tower jutted out against the horizon like a relic of an industrial past. These reports, relayed in hushed urgency among the community's inner circle, suggested that the enemy's next phase of operation was already underway. It was as if they had retreated only to re-emerge with a new strategy, one that would test the newly reinforced defenses and challenge the very foundations of the community's unity. Henry convened a second, more urgent meeting in a room that had once served as a storeroom for harvest supplies. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and the quiet intensity of minds at work. Overhead, the beams of the old building bore silent witness to the debates and discussions that unfolded. Henry's gaze swept across the assembled group, faces etched with determination, eyes reflecting the flickering hope of those who believed in the power of solidarity. He laid out a plan that was as bold as it was measured. The community would not simply wait for the enemy's return but would take the initiative to disrupt their command lines. Small, agile teams would be dispatched to conduct reconnaissance beyond the immediate boundaries of Westwood, gathering information on enemy movements and sabotaging key communication nodes. These actions, though fraught with risk, were necessary to destabilize an enemy that had grown too confident in their technological advantage. The plan was methodical. One team, led by a seasoned farmer whose hands were as skilled with a scythe as they were with a rifle, was tasked with disabling the enemy's communication tower. Another group, composed of the younger townsfolk, whose swift movements and keen senses were honed by a lifetime of navigating the rugged countryside, would shadow enemy patrols along the ridge, identifying their numbers and mapping their potential routes of retreat or further attack. Meanwhile, Henry himself would lead a small contingent to secure the vital crossroads at the edge of town, a junction that, if controlled, could serve as a linchpin in the overall defensive strategy. As preparations for these covert operations moved forward, the community found moments of reprieve amid the relentless pace of tactical maneuvers. In quiet corners of the rebuilt town square, neighbors exchanged stories of past hardships and shared memories of better times, tales of harvest festivals, of long summer days spent under the benevolent gaze of a forgiving sun, of laughter echoing through fields that had since borne witness to sorrow and struggle. These moments of connection, brief as they were, rekindled a sense of identity that had been the foundation of Westwood for countless years. It was a reminder that their struggle was not simply against an external enemy but against the creeping erosion of hope and the gradual forgetting of who they were. In that renewal of spirit lay the true strength of the community, a strength that transcended the physical and delved deep into the collective memory of a people bound together by shared purpose and unyielding love for their land. With the midday sun climbing higher and the promise of impending action thick in the air, Henry led his selected team toward the communication tower. The journey was fraught with the dual perils of natural hazards and the ever-present threat of enemy patrols. The path, winding through a grove of ancient pines and over rocky outcrops, was a reminder of the natural beauty that had both sustained and challenged Westwood's inhabitants for generations. As they advanced, the team moved with a silent precision, a testament to the training that, though rudimentary, had been sharpened by necessity and honed by repeated confrontations with adversity. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a bird, was monitored with the alertness of seasoned scouts. Henry's mind, ever calculating, weighed each step with the awareness that one misstep could tip the delicate balance between success and catastrophe. At the base of the towering structure, a crumbling edifice once intended as a beacon of modern connectivity, the team paused in a moment of hushed reverence. The tower, its metal framework rusted and entangled with creeping vines, stood as a stark contrast to the organic resilience of the surrounding landscape. Here was a symbol of an era that had promised progress but had ultimately fallen prey to neglect and the passage of time. Yet, in its decay, it now served a new purpose, a critical node in the enemy's network that could, if disabled, cripple their ability to coordinate further assaults. With a mixture of caution and resolve, the team set about their task. Under Henry's steady guidance, they dismantled key components of the tower, their actions deliberate and methodical. The sound of tools against metal mingled with the whisper of the wind, creating a counterpoint to the distant hum of enemy machinery. Each bolt removed, each circuit severed, was a small victory, a tangible blow against an adversary that believed itself invincible in its technological prowess. Back in Westwood, as the operation unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance, the atmosphere grew charged with the silent anticipation of impending retribution. The enemy, unaware of the sabotage unfolding in their midst, continued their slow, deliberate repositioning along the ridge. Their movements, once characterized by the cold precision of modern warfare, began to falter under the weight of unexpected disruptions. The disarray rippled through their ranks, a subtle but significant indication that Westwood's defenders were not merely reacting but actively reclaiming the initiative. Hours later, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the recovering town, Henry reconvened with the scattered leaders. In the aftermath of the successful sabotage, there was a cautious optimism, a belief that the tide might yet be turned in their favor. Yet, the air was thick with the understanding that this was only the beginning of a larger, more arduous campaign. The enemy, though momentarily disrupted, was already recalibrating its strategy, its leaders undoubtedly aware of the breach in their communications. In response, Henry's plan evolved once again. They would now shift from reactive defense to proactive counteroffensives, targeting not only the physical nodes of the enemy's network but also the psychological underpinnings of their coordinated assault. That evening, as dusk surrendered to the velvet cloak of night, Henry stood on a hillside overlooking Westwood. The panorama before him was both haunting and hopeful, a tapestry of scars etched into the land and the flickering lights of a community that refused to be extinguished. In the quiet solitude of that moment, amid the gentle murmur of the wind and the distant, subdued clamor of reeling enemy forces, he allowed himself a brief pause. In that pause, the magnitude of their struggle and the strength of their unity converged into a singular, resolute determination. Westwood was not simply a collection of fields and barns, it was a living, breathing embodiment of history, sacrifice, and the relentless human spirit. Henry's thoughts turned to the road ahead, a road that would demand every ounce of ingenuity, every spark of courage, and every deep-seated conviction that had been nurtured in the hearts of Westwood's people. The coming days promised further challenges, coordinated enemy counterattacks, the risk of internal fractures under the strain of prolonged conflict, and the ever-present specter of loss that hovered like a silent threat. Yet, in that very uncertainty lay the opportunity for transformation, a chance to forge a future that honored the past while boldly defying the forces that sought to subjugate it. As night deepened once more over Westwood, the community settled into a rhythm of watchfulness and measured anticipation. Henry returned to the farmhouse, where in a quiet room illuminated by the soft glow of a solitary lamp, he penned notes and reflections that captured the essence of the day's events. Each line of his journal was a testament to the sacrifices made, the lessons learned, and the unwavering hope that fueled their resistance. His pen moved with the urgency of a man who understood that history was being written with every heartbeat, every whispered command, every act of defiance against an enemy who underestimated the power of unity. In the soft, contemplative hours before sleep claimed him, Henry Cavill gazed out of a small window at the starlit expanse above. The heavens, vast and unchanging, bore silent witness to the ephemeral struggles below, a reminder that the passage of time would eventually heal even the deepest wounds, and that from the crucible of conflict, a renewed spirit of resilience and hope could emerge. With that thought warming him against the encroaching cold of the night, he resolved that tomorrow would be another day of relentless striving, a day when every action, every sacrifice, would contribute to the enduring legacy of Westwood. Thus, as the land of Westwood slumbered beneath a blanket of stars and whispered promises of a new dawn, Henry Cavill embraced the quiet, steadfast belief that true strength lies not in the fleeting power of modern armaments, but in the timeless bonds of community, heritage, and the indomitable human will. In that conviction, he found the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the spirit of the land and its people would forever serve as an unassailable fortress against the forces of tyranny. Under a sky streaked with the bruised purples and fiery oranges of a waning day, Westwood braced itself for the final, decisive confrontation. In the heart of the battered town, where the scars of previous clashes were etched into every weathered plank and furrowed field, Henry Cavill surveyed the land with a mixture of resolve and solemn anticipation. The community, tempered by relentless strife and united by an unyielding bond with the soil beneath their feet, had reached a moment where the enemy's ambitions would be met with a defiant, all-consuming resistance. Every heartbeat in Westwood pulsed in time with an ancient cadence, a rhythm forged by generations who had faced nature's fury and human treachery with unbending spirit. The enemy, now regrouped and emboldened by the spoils of earlier incursions, advanced with a cold, calculated ferocity along the open country roads. Their vehicles and mechanized formations contrasted starkly with the organic, improvised defenses of Westwood. Yet, the local fighters were no strangers to adversity. They had adapted the contours of the landscape into a labyrinth of ambushes, barricades, and hidden vantage points. Under Henry's command, the resistance had evolved from a reactive band of disparate individuals into a formidable, cohesive force, a living embodiment of resilience that had weathered every storm in its long history. In the shadow of an ancient oak that had silently witnessed centuries of harvests and hardships, Henry led his closest lieutenants to a strategic ridge overlooking the valley. From that elevated perch, the full scope of the enemy's approach was revealed, a tidal wave of modern might, an organized array of forces that had underestimated the wild, untamed power of community spirit. With eyes that burned like embers of conviction, Henry traced the enemy's lines in the dust and mapped their likely trajectories, every detail of their movement etched into his mind. He knew that this confrontation was more than a battle for territory, it was a struggle for identity, for the soul of Westwood itself. As twilight deepened into an inky darkness, the resistance moved into position. Under the concealment of night, farmers, shopkeepers, and townsfolk alike took up arms and assumed their posts along the network of hidden trails and rugged outcroppings. Improvised signals, flickering lanterns, stenciled markings on weathered stone, and subtle gestures passed between vigilant eyes, wove together into a silent communication network that belied the enemy's high-tech surveillance. The natural barriers of the land, dense groves, steep ravines, and meandering streams, were marshaled as allies in this last stand, turning every inch of Westwood into a bastion of hope and defiance. In the heart of the ensuing battle, as the first volley of gunfire shattered the nocturnal silence, Henry advanced into the thick of the fray with unwavering determination. The chaos of combat unfolded in a relentless cadence, the staccato of rifle bursts, the roar of engines as enemy vehicles ground over the rough terrain, and the anguished cries of those who had fallen, a bitter chorus that resonated across the fields. Amid this maelstrom, Henry's presence was a steady beacon of calm. Each step he took was deliberate, each movement imbued with a practiced grace that had once graced the silver screen and now found its true expression in the brutal honesty of war. In the melee, moments of extraordinary heroism emerged. A weathered farmer, his hands calloused by decades of labor, led a desperate charge that reclaimed a vital outpost along a narrow ravine. A group of young townsfolk, their eyes bright with the fire of defiance, ambushed a patrol with a series of well-coordinated strikes that sowed confusion among the enemy ranks. The clash of modern weaponry against time-honored resolve created a dramatic interplay of light and shadow, a living tableau where every sacrifice, every act of courage, echoed the legacy of those who had come before. Henry's mind raced with the tactical urgency of the moment. He orchestrated flanking maneuvers with the precision of a seasoned tactician, his every command delivered in a tone that resonated with both authority and empathy. In these final hours, the enemy's modern advantages began to falter against the unpredictable ingenuity of a people fighting for their very existence. The resistance exploited every vulnerability, sabotaging communication lines, creating diversions with controlled fires, and using the land's natural contours to mask their movements. Slowly, the enemy's disciplined formations began to unravel, as shock and uncertainty crept into their ranks. Yet the battle exacted a heavy toll. Amid the swirling smoke and cacophony of conflict, Henry witnessed both the brilliance and the tragedy of war. Every fallen comrade, every scarred patch of earth, was a stark reminder that the price of freedom was measured in blood and sacrifice. In the thick of the struggle, as he pulled a wounded neighbor to safety behind the natural cover of a fallen boulder, Henry's gaze hardened with the knowledge that this fight was as personal as it was communal. The defense of Westwood was a fight for the right to preserve a way of life, a legacy passed down through centuries that no invader could simply erase. As the hours wore on, the enemy's momentum waned under the weight of relentless local resistance. Their forces, once confident and methodical, began to show signs of disarray. The synchronized advance that had seemed so formidable now fragmented into scattered, isolated pockets of retreat. In the growing light of early dawn, the battered remnants of the invaders were forced into a hasty withdrawal, their ambitions stymied by the indomitable will of a community united in purpose. In the midst of the final stand, as the first blush of sunrise painted the horizon with hope, Henry stood at the forefront of a battlefield transformed by the sacrifices of the night. The struggle had been fierce and unyielding, yet it had also forged an unbreakable bond among those who had fought side by side. The enemy's retreat was not a victory of modern might over rustic valor, but a resounding affirmation that the spirit of Westwood, steeped in tradition and fortified by unity, could defy even the most overwhelming forces. The battle's echoes lingered in the silent aftermath, a quiet, somber lull that settled over the scarred land as survivors began to tend to the wounded and honor the fallen. In that fragile calm, Henry Cavill surveyed the devastation with a deep, aching gratitude for the resilience of the human spirit. Westwood had withstood the crucible of conflict, its people emerging battered yet unbowed, determined to rebuild and renew the legacy that had defined them for generations. In the wake of the fierce night's battle, as the sun climbed steadily into a crystal-clear sky, Westwood awoke to a fragile peace, a peace that was both hard-won and laced with the bittersweet memories of sacrifice. The once sundered community began to stir, its people emerging from the shelters they had taken refuge in during the chaos of combat. The early morning light revealed a landscape transformed, fields bore fresh scars where the enemy's fire had raged, yet nature's gentle resilience was evident in the dew-covered grass and the steadfast growth of wildflowers through the cracks in the earth. This was a land reborn, its wounds destined to heal under the nurturing care of those who loved it most dearly. Henry Cavill, now a man not only defined by his cinematic triumphs but by the tangible heroism he had exhibited in defense of Westwood, walked through the town with measured steps and a reflective heart. The battle had left an indelible mark on him, a testament to both the cost of war and the enduring strength of community. In the quiet moments after the retreat of the enemy, he took stock of the scene, the subdued murmurs of gratitude from neighbors, the collaborative efforts to clear debris and repair battered structures, and the silent resolve etched on every face that had witnessed the night's valor. The community was coming together not merely to rebuild what had been lost, but to forge a new identity, one that honored its storied past while embracing the promise of a revitalized future. At the heart of the town, the farmhouse had once again become the center of communal life. Its sturdy walls, weathered by time and conflict, now stood as a symbol of hope and continuity. Inside, Henry gathered with the leaders and defenders of Westwood, their eyes reflecting both the sorrow for fallen comrades and the determination to carry forward their legacy. There was no grand ceremony or lofty rhetoric, there was only the quiet understanding that every act of reconstruction was an act of defiance against forces that had sought to erase their history. With deliberate care, they began to rebuild not only physical structures but the intangible bonds that had sustained them through adversity, the shared meals, the quiet conversations under starlight, the mutual support that had turned strangers into a family united by fate. In the days that followed, Westwood transformed into a living canvas of renewal. The fields, once the silent battlegrounds of a desperate struggle, became the stage for communal labor and celebration. Neighbors gathered to replant crops, mend fences, and restore old barns that had borne witness to generations of harvests and hardships. Amid the rhythmic hum of labor and the soft murmur of shared memories, the people of Westwood discovered that even in the darkest hours, the seeds of hope could be sown anew. Each repaired structure, each replanted seed, became a symbol of rebirth, a declaration that the spirit of the land could not be vanquished, no matter the ravages of conflict. Henry's role in this renaissance was both practical and deeply personal. He moved among the townsfolk with a quiet humility that belied his fame, his presence a constant reminder that true heroism was not measured in accolades but in the courage to stand with one's community in its hour of need. He listened to the stories of loss and perseverance shared by elders, learned from the impassioned dreams of the youth, and offered his own quiet counsel to those who doubted the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. In his measured steps, Westwood found not only a leader but also a kindred spirit, a man who had come from the glare of the spotlight only to discover that the true essence of life lay in the simple, enduring bonds between people and their land. In the wake of the enemy's retreat, intelligence reports and whispered rumors spoke of a shifting tide in the wider world, a recognition that the old ways, the intimate connection between community and nature, were finding new champions in unexpected places. Westwood, once a quiet outpost overlooked by the modern forces of industrial ambition, was now emerging as a beacon of grassroots resistance and sustainable renewal. As news of their victory spread, neighboring communities began to rally around Westwood's example. The once isolated town found itself at the center of a burgeoning movement, a coalition of villages and hamlets determined to reclaim the values of heritage, unity, and respect for the natural world. In the golden light of a late afternoon, as the air was filled with the scent of freshly turned earth and the harmonious sound of rebuilding, Henry stood on the porch of the farmhouse and gazed out over the rejuvenated fields. In that moment, every hardship endured, every drop of sweat and every tear shed in the dark hours of battle, coalesced into a single, powerful truth, that true victory was not measured by the defeat of an enemy, but by the resilience of a community that dared to dream of a better future. The legacy of Westwood was no longer a relic of a bygone era, it was a living, breathing force, a testament to the enduring power of human solidarity. As twilight once more descended upon the land, the town gathered for a quiet celebration beneath a canopy of stars. There was no ostentatious display, only the soft, collective acknowledgement of a new beginning, a shared promise that the lessons of the past would guide them into the future. In that luminous hour, as voices mingled with the gentle rustling of the wind and the distant call of night birds, Henry Cavill felt a profound sense of closure and renewal. The struggles and sacrifices of the past had not been in vain, they had forged a community that was stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. In the final moments of that day, as the night embraced Westwood in a tender, forgiving silence, the people looked upward to a sky vast and eternal, a sky that had witnessed every trial and triumph of their shared journey. They understood, in the quiet depth of their souls, that the dawn of a new legacy was upon them. Westwood would endure, its story carried forward in every rebuilt home, every nurtured field, and every heart that beat in unison with the timeless rhythm of hope and resilience. Thus, as the stars shone with the soft glow of promise and the first hints of dawn began to edge the horizon, the legacy of Westwood and its people was sealed, a legacy born of struggle, sustained by unity, and destined to flourish in the light of a new day.